I've spent considerable time studying government programs, and there's something peculiar happening right now that most people are missing entirely. The Social Security Administration has identified 33.9 million Americans who qualify for benefits they're not receiving, money that's already been set aside, sitting there waiting to be claimed. Now, here's what makes this fascinating from a purely rational standpoint. We're not talking about some new government handout or complicated program. This is about understanding what you've already earned through decades of payroll taxes. The average Social Security recipient is leaving approximately $1,400 annually on the table simply because they don't know these provisions exist. Think about that for a moment. $1,400. That's not pocket change when you're living on a fixed income. That's utility bills. That's medications. That's the difference between financial stress and breathing room. The really interesting part, 3 specific changes in the federal code have made millions more people eligible for supplemental benefits. Cost of living adjustments they didn't know they qualified for, and Medicare premium reductions that automatically put money back in your account. But nobody's sending you a letter explaining this. You have to know where to look. Let me tell you something I've learned over 8 decades of studying how systems work and how people think. Most folks approach Social Security the same way they approach their medicine cabinet. They know it's important, they know it's there, but they never really read the fine print. And that's precisely where the opportunity sits, hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to simply pay attention. The Social Security system wasn't designed to be deliberately confusing, but like most government programs that have been amended 47 times since 1935, it's become a labyrinth. Each amendment added another layer, another exception, another qualification that nobody bothered to explain in plain English. And here we are, nearly 90 years later, with 33.9 million people who qualify for benefits they don't even know exist. That's not a small number. That's roughly the entire population of Texas. Imagine an entire state's worth of people walking past money with their name on it. Now, I want you to think about this rationally for a moment. The government calculates your Social Security benefit based on your highest 35 years of earnings. That's straightforward enough. But what they don't advertise is that there are 17 different categories of supplemental benefits, adjustments, and credits that can increase your monthly check. 17. Most people know about maybe 2 or 3 of them. The spousal benefit, perhaps, maybe survivor benefits if they've lost a partner, but the other 14, they're operating in complete obscurity, and that's costing people real money. Let's start with something called the Windfall Elimination Provision Exemption. Now that's a mouthful, and the name alone is enough to make most people's eyes glaze over. But here's what it actually means in terms you can use. If you worked in a job that didn't withhold Social Security taxes, perhaps you were a teacher in one of 15 states, or a state government employee, or you worked for a railroad, the government applies something called the Windfall Elimination Provision that reduces your Social Security benefit. They do this because they assume you're getting a pension from that work. Fair enough. But here's the part they don't tell you. If you have 30 or more years of substantial earnings under Social Security, you're exempt from this reduction, completely exempt. And if you have 21 to 29 years, you get a partial exemption that increases with each additional year. I've met people who worked 28 years paying into Social Security and 3 years in a teaching position that didn't withhold Social Security taxes. The government applied the full Windfall Elimination Provision reduction to their benefit, cutting their monthly check by several $100s, when in fact they should have only received a minimal reduction. Why? Because nobody told them to request a manual review of their earnings record. Nobody explained that they needed to provide documentation showing their substantial earnings years. The system doesn't automatically catch this. You have to know to ask. And when you do ask and when you provide the right documentation, suddenly money starts flowing back into your account. Not next year, not eventually, usually within 60 to 90 days. Then there's the matter of divorced spousal benefits, which might be the most misunderstood provision in the entire Social Security Code. I've watched intelligent people, successful people, people who built businesses and raised families, completely miss this opportunity because they made one fundamental assumption. They assume that because they're divorced, they've severed all financial connection to their former spouse's work record. That's not how it works. If you were married for at least 10 years, and you're currently unmarried, and your ex-spouse is entitled to Social Security benefits, you can claim up to 50% of their benefit amount, even if they've remarried, even if they haven't filed for their own benefits yet, even if you haven't spoken to them in 30 years. The system doesn't require their permission. It doesn't notify them. It simply recognizes that you contributed to a household for a decade, and that has economic value. Here's where it gets even more interesting from a pure mathematics standpoint. If your own benefit is less than 50% of your ex-spouse's benefit, you're leaving money on the table every single month by not filing for the divorced spousal benefit. And if your ex-spouse had high earnings, maybe they were a physician or an executive or they owned a successful business, that spousal benefit could be substantially higher than your own. I know a woman who worked part-time for most of her career while raising 3 children. Her own Social Security benefit was about $900 a month. Her ex-husband, who she divorced after 22 years of marriage, had been a corporate attorney. His benefit was over $3,000 monthly. She was entitled to $1,500 per month as a divorced spousal benefit, but she didn't know to ask for it. For 4 years, she lived on $900 a month when she should have been receiving $1,500. That's $600 monthly, $7,200 annually, nearly $29,000 over 4 years. Money that was legally hers, that she'd earned through decades of managing a household, gone forever because the system doesn't actively inform you. Now let's talk about something called recalculation, because this is where the Social Security Administration's computer systems work in your favor if you understand how they function. Every year the Social Security Administration recalculates your benefit if you're still working and earning income. They look at your earnings from the previous year, and if that year was higher than one of the 35 years they originally used to calculate your benefit, they automatically substitute the higher year and increase your monthly payment. This happens without you doing anything. But here's what they don't tell you. This recalculation sometimes fails. The computer systems don't always properly import your earnings data from the IRS. If you're working past your full retirement age and earning decent income, you should verify every single year that your benefit increased appropriately. You do this by requesting your earnings record and comparing it against your tax returns. Takes maybe an hour. And when you find a discrepancy, and you'll be surprised how often these occur, you file for a manual recalculation, provide your tax documentation, and within a few months, your benefit increases retroactively. I knew a gentleman who worked part-time consulting from age 67 to 72, earning between $30,000 and $40,000 annually. Good supplemental income. His Social Security benefit should have increased each year as these earnings replaced lower earning years from the 1980s. It didn't. For 5 years, his benefit remained static. When he finally requested a manual review, they discovered that none of his post-retirement earnings had been properly credited. His benefit increased by $260 per month, and he received a retroactive payment of over $15,000 covering the years they'd missed, all because he spent 1 hour reviewing his earnings record. Let's discuss Medicare premiums for a moment, because there's a connection to Social Security that most people never consider. Your Medicare Part B premium is automatically deducted from your Social Security check. For most people in 2026, that's about $175 monthly. But there are income-based adjustments called IRMA, Income-Related Monthly Adjustment Amount, that can increase this premium significantly if your income exceeds certain thresholds. Here's the critical part. IRMA is based on your tax return from 2 years prior. So your 2026 Medicare premium is based on your 2024 income. If your income drops significantly due to retirement, if you sold a property or a business in 2024 but your income is now much lower, if you experienced a life-changing event like divorce or the death of a spouse, you can request a redetermination and potentially reduce your Medicare premium by several $100s monthly. That money doesn't just disappear into the ether, it goes directly back into your Social Security check because you're paying less for Medicare. I've seen people paying $600 monthly for Medicare Part B because they had a one-time capital gain from selling their home when their actual ongoing income would qualify them for the standard premium. They're overpaying $425 every single month, $5,100 annually, because they don't know to file Form SSA 44 requesting a redetermination. The Social Security Administration doesn't volunteer this information. They wait for you to request it, and most people never do. Now, here's something that reveals how the system actually thinks about these programs. There's a provision called auxiliary benefits that provides additional money for dependent children, even if you're receiving retirement benefits rather than disability. If you have a child under 18 or under 19 if they're still in high school, or any age if they became disabled before age 22, that child can receive up to 50% of your benefit amount while you're receiving retirement benefits. Most people associate dependent benefits with Social Security disability, but they exist for retirement benefits too. I've met grandparents raising grandchildren who never knew these children qualified for benefits based on the grandparents' record. That's several $100s per child per month. That could be covering food, clothing, education expenses. The government's approach to these programs follows a consistent pattern that once you recognize it, everything becomes clearer. They will pay every benefit you're entitled to, but they operate on a request-based system rather than an automatic notification system. They're not hiding information, but they're also not going out of their way to educate people about provisions that might benefit them. It's your responsibility to know what exists and to ask for it. That's not necessarily fair, but it's how the system works, and complaining about it doesn't put money in your pocket. Understanding it does. Let me tell you about representative payees for a moment, because this affects families more than individuals realize. If you're managing Social Security benefits for an elderly parent or a disabled family member, you need to understand that as a representative payee, you have the authority to request reviews, file for additional benefits, and ensure that person is receiving everything they're entitled to. Many representative payees don't realize the scope of their responsibilities. They receive the monthly check, they manage the money, but they never think to review whether that check amount is correct or whether there are other benefits available. That's leaving money on the table, and when you're managing resources for someone who can't advocate for themselves, every dollar matters. There's also something called the lump sum death payment that almost nobody knows about. When a Social Security recipient dies, there's a one-time payment of $255 available to the surviving spouse, or in some cases to a child who was receiving benefits on the deceased's record. It's not much money in the grand scheme of things, but it's something and it's available. But you have to apply for it within 2 years of the death. After that, it's gone. The Social Security Administration doesn't automatically pay it. They don't send you a notice. You have to know it exists and request it. Here's what I want you to understand about why this matters beyond just the immediate financial impact. Every dollar you're entitled to, but not receiving, compounds over time in terms of lost opportunity. If you're missing $200 monthly from a benefit you should be receiving, that's $2,400 annually. Over 10 years, that's $24,000. If you had invested that money conservatively at even 4% annually, you're looking at over $30,000. But more importantly, that's money that could have reduced financial stress, that could have allowed you to maintain independence longer, that could have covered healthcare expenses that you instead put on a credit card and paid interest on. The true cost isn't just the missing money, it's everything that money could have done for you over time. The Social Security system contains dozens of these provisions, each one creating a small stream of additional income for people who know to look for them. Individually, each provision might only add $50 or $100 or $200 monthly. But when you stack them together, when you ensure you're receiving every benefit you've earned, suddenly you're looking at meaningful money. $400 monthly is $4,800 annually. That's a couple of mortgage payments or property taxes or a year's worth of prescription costs for many people. So here's my advice, given as someone who spent his entire life studying systems and trying to understand how they actually work rather than how they're supposed to work. Treat your Social Security benefits the same way you'd treat any other significant financial asset. Review them annually. Request your earnings record and verify every year is correctly reported. If you were married for more than 10 years and you're divorced, investigate spousal benefits. If you worked in a job that didn't withhold Social Security taxes, verify whether the windfall elimination provision is being applied correctly. If you're still working past retirement age, verify that your benefits are being recalculated annually. If your income dropped significantly, check whether you can reduce your Medicare premiums. This isn't complicated work, but it requires knowing what questions to ask and being willing to spend a few hours annually protecting your financial interests.